Reviewing today Glinda of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Now, as with all the other Oz books I've been reviewing on this channel, I'm reading this all out of the Complete Stories of Oz, which has the original 14 stories by L. Frank Baum plus one. Glinda of Oz is the last book in this collection. So some brief background. L. Frank Baum wrote 14 canonical Oz stories. I say canonical because there are actually some extra stories he wrote that connect to Oz as well. One of them is in this volume, The Little Wizard of Oz Stories. All that is on Wikipedia if anyone's interested. But 14 canonical stories. After he died, the publishers kept the Oz series going by handing it off to other writers, and then they stopped in the mid-60s after a total of 40 books, which became known as the Famous 40, or I think sometimes the Fabulous 40 in the Oz canon. And for a few decades, that was the canon, just those 40 books. And then I think recently the publishers have started returning to that IP again and licensing more canonical books. But anyways, for a long time it was the Famous 40, of which only the first 14 were written by L. Frank Baum before he died, and this is the last book that he wrote. It was released, I believe, in 1920, and it was released posthumously. So L. Frank Baum had previously died the year before, so this book was released after he was dead, and I believe actually book 13, The Magic of Oz, was also released posthumously. So this is one of two books in the Oz series that was released posthumously after he died. I mentioned in the first video I did on this series that although I'm just now making a project of reading through the Oz books, I've been what I would call Oz curious for a while now. Didn't really have the patience to sit down and read all the books, but was kind of curious about this big fantasy world that went on for so many books. And as such, I had picked up a few bits about this book. If memory serves, I think my younger sister had a copy when we were kids. And I read like the back cover of the publisher's introduction or something, where it mentioned that this book was written during or just after World War One, and because of that reflected kind of a pessimistic attitude and was one of the darker books in the Oz series. Also, L. Frank Baum's health was declining at this point. This was right before he died, which may also have contributed to the darker tone of it. And then I don't know. I have a feeling I've read similar things on the internet over the years or something like that. So those were my expectations to this book going in. Now, the last several Oz books in this series have been rather silly and lazily written. And, you know, if you see my reviews of those books, I did not hold back on them. But I was expecting this one to be a little bit deeper, a little bit darker, kind of one of L. Frank Baum's final message books before he died. But after having read it, I kind of think this is just as silly as the other books. And probably L. Frank Baum didn't know it was going to be his last book when he wrote it, so there was no reason to expect that anything would be that he put like a final message in it. Although, again, I don't know. I could be wrong. Now, the World War I allegory. There are two nations here in the land of Oz that are going to war over some silly stuff. So it does seem to be a little bit like World War I allegory. But by the same token, it's not anything that strikes me as terribly new to the Oz series. In fact, it seems a bit like plot points which are being recycled from previous Oz stories. Oh, I totally forgot to mention on this video. Sorry, I was supposed to mention this at the beginning. I'm doing this as a buddy reads with Dane Reads. Sorry, Dane. Lot of stuff to cover here, so I'm a little bit scatterbrained. Now, originally the plan was we were going to do an Oz video every 2 weeks as we worked our way through this series. I completely fell off schedule the last few months for various reasons. So it's still a buddy read, kind of. We're just on a time lag here. So Dane posted his review of this book way back in April. I will link to it in the video down below, and I have watched his video before filming mine. So I am kind of going to be commenting on his review, and it's still a buddy reads of sorts, just with a time difference here. The other thing I'm relying on is, I've mentioned this in past videos, a series of reviews of the Oz books by an author named Marie Ness, who posted them at Tor.com way back in 2010, so over 10 years ago at this point, but still viewable online. And I've been reading her reviews as I worked my way through the Oz series. I find them very insightful, interesting, informative. So speaking of Marie Ness, she in her review is going for the World War I allegory angle here, which is something as I mentioned, I've heard in previous places. So let me just read from the first paragraph of her review. She says, Glinda of Oz, L. Frank Baum's last book, was written during World War I and published posthumously shortly after its end. Perhaps influenced by that conflict, it focuses on the dangers of technology with a great domed city that can be both protection and trap, and the limitations of magic and magical assistance. Further echoes of that conflict may be seen in the use of submarines to wage war and the appearance of firearms. In earlier books, characters disliked guns since they could go off by mistake and scare people. Unhinged leaders dragging their peaceful subjects into unwanted wars, and futile peace missions where neither side is particularly interested in peace. Okay, so that's Marie Ness' summary of the plot of this book, which is, as you can see, heavily leaning into the World War I allegory. And I don't want to say that's wrong because, who knows? I don't have any insight into L. Frank Baum's head. Maybe he was really influenced by World War I, or maybe he was a little influenced by World War I going on. It's hard to say, but when I was reading this, I did notice that there just seemed to be elements recycled from previous Oz series. So this idea of kind of two groups in the land of Oz who are going to war over some silly reason, that's not the first time we've seen this in this series. We saw it in the Patchwork Girl of Oz, when there was this silly conflict between the Hoppers and the Horners that Dorothy or somebody had to diffuse. Also in Glinda of Oz, one of the peoples that's going to war is the Flatheads, who are ruled by a supreme dictator who kind of fools everybody into believing that it's a democracy, even though he in reality is the supreme dictator. This is also, it seems to me, a recycled plot point. We saw this before in the Lost Princess of Oz, when it was High Cuculorum in the land of Tea, who was running a very similar grift on his people. So, the World War I allegory, maybe it's there. I also feel like L. Frank Baum is recycling bits of his plots again. Speaking of plots, yeah, the plot of this book is pretty ridiculous. Now, to be fair, the plots of all the Oz books are pretty ridiculous, and I guess they were written for children, but the inconsistencies do sometimes bug me. So, one of the silly things about this whole Oz series is that it's established that Ozma of Oz is the ruler of all of Oz. This is all she is always introduced, always established. And yet, in every single Oz story, they go out and they discover little various groups or kingdoms all throughout Oz that are their own little autonomous kingdom. And don't either haven't heard of Ozma or don't recognize her authority. Now, to be fair to L. Frank Baum, I think the reason he did this is because he just kind of had to. And it's worth remembering that he did not plan this whole series out from the beginning. Quite the contrary, he wanted to finish after book 6, The Emerald City of Oz, but because of the public demand for these books and because he went bankrupt, he just had to keep coming back to his cash cow, the Oz series. But perhaps as a result of that lack of planning, he had written himself into a number of corners. One corner he wrote himself into is having established Ozma as the ruler of the land of Oz. There's no opportunity for any drama in the land of Oz if it's all being peacefully ruled by Ozma. So every book subsequently either has to take place outside of the land of Oz, and there are a few of those in the Oz canon, but it's a little bit silly to have an Oz book that, to have all the Oz books always take place outside of the land of Oz. So then they take place inside of the land of Oz, but as the characters are traveling along, they meet all these little kingdoms that are completely autonomous and have no idea who Ozma is. And that happens so frequently throughout these books. You think, okay, well, this is a bit ridiculous to keep explaining that Ozma is the ruler of all of Oz when she clearly isn't. She rules like the Emerald City and seems to have very little jurisdiction outside of the Emerald City. I don't know, maybe that's a political allegory, huh? For some of these governments that are... I'm not going to go down that path. That's the danger of doing these things unscripted. Anyways, Ozma and Dorothy find out through Glinda's Book of Records. So Glinda's Book of Records is this book that Glinda the Good Witch has, which records everything that's happening in Oz as it's happening. That the Skeezers and the Flatheads are going to go to war against each other. Now, they've never heard of the Skeezers and the Flatheads before. They're off in some part of the land of Oz that Ozma has never been to and seems to have no control over. But Ozma says, well, I am their ruler. Actually, yeah, I've got that quote written down somewhere here. Yeah. Ozma says, I am ruler of all the land of Oz, which includes the Gilligan country, the Quadlin country, the Winky country, and the Munchkin country, as well as the Emerald City. And being princess of this fairyland, it is my duty to make all my people, wherever they may be, happy and content to settle their disputes and keep them from quarreling. So, while the Skeezers and Flatheads may not know me or that I am their lawful ruler, I know that they inhabit my kingdom and are my subjects. So I would not be doing my duty if I kept away from them and allowed them to fight. So Dorothy and Ozma travel out to the land of the Skeezers and the Flatheads in order to try and put down this conflict. Now, basically all the Oz stories, or almost all of the Oz stories, are essentially journey stories. There's point A on the map, point B on the map. The characters have to travel between the 2 points, and then they encounter things along the way. And this is where all those little kingdoms around the land of Oz come up. So sure enough, as they're going through, they encounter like a land of the giant spiders, where the spiders try to imprison Ozma and Dorothy. And the king of the giant spiders is again another. This is another place in Oz where they've never heard of Ozma and don't recognize her authority. This is all throughout these books. And then there's a place called the Mist Maidens. The place isn't called the Mist Maidens. There's these mountains of mist, and they are helped across by these fairies called the Mist Maidens. And then they get to the land of the Skeezers and the Flatheads. Now, for my money, this last book, Glinda of Oz, is not nearly as creative as some of the other books in the Oz series. I mean, I don't know, creative maybe is the wrong word for it. Not quite as fun. In past books, when Dorothy or whoever is traveling through Oz, they encounter some really bizarre places, like the land of the loons, which is a bunch of balloons where they all get puffed up, and if they get too puffed up, then they pop. Or a land where all the it's all pastries, or a land where they're all paper dolls and they get blown over by breezes, or a land where they're all utensils and everyone's making utensil puns, or there's just all these. Yeah, I said imaginative at first, and maybe I should take imaginative back, because sometimes you get the impression that L. Frank Baum is just going with whatever happened to be in the room next to him. He's like, okay, and then they stumbled into the land of utensils, and after the land of utensils, the land of bread. Yeah, he must have written half of these books when he was in his kitchen. I mean, the land of utensils and the land of the talking bread. These are, I'm not making these up. These are real lands that the Oz characters have traveled to. So maybe imaginative is giving him too much credit, but fun, whimsical, part of the silliness. In Glinda of Oz, I didn't get that same vibe. The I don't know, giant spiders can be kind of creepy and scary if they're done right, but that element is not hit on here. They're not scary giant spiders. They're just giant spiders. Miss Maidens, and then we get to the land of the Flatheads, which I don't know. It's just people with flat heads who, and because they're flatheads, they don't have any brains, so they have to carry their brains in jars with them. He must have really been running out of ideas by this point in the series. Now, Marie Ness over at Tor.com, I've been enjoying her reviews throughout this whole Oz series. She has something that she frequently talks about called Ozma Fails, where Ozma is framed by the narrator as being this great benevolent ruler of Oz, but in reality she just does one dumb thing after another, if you actually look at the plot of the story. Now, Marie Ness, if memory serves, didn't hit this point too hard in her own review, but she totally could have, because one of the Ozma fails here is Ozma just goes into these lands without any backup plan or any kind of force of arms, just expecting that everybody is going to listen to her, and they don't. Now, Ozma does have some magic. At this point in the series, she has some magic. This is one of those inconsistencies. This was not true of the early books, but now it's been established that Ozma is some sort of a fairy queen that has fairy magic. But a lot of the other characters have magic as well. This is another inconsistency in these Oz books. It was established that Ozma forbade anyone else in the land of Oz to use magic. But then every book, we just have all these other characters using magic. And of course, the magic is inconsistent and... yeah, inconsistent. Speaking of inconsistencies, the other thing is that Dorothy has the magic belt, which they got from the Gnome King way back in book 3, I think. And ever since then, it's gone back and forth as to who has this magic belt. Is it Dorothy or Ozma? At this point, Dorothy has it. It's also been established as inconsistent. Sorry, it's also been inconsistent what the powers of this magic belt are. In previous books, I think it had the power to transport you anywhere you wanted to go. But in this book, it doesn't seem to have that power. Well, I'm complaining about inconsistencies. Another inconsistency is whether or not people can die in the land of Oz. So this is another case where L. Frank Baum has just written himself into a corner. And one of the... I don't remember, book 5 or book 6, he established that nobody could die in the land of Oz. I think his intention was to just make this a really safe place for children readers who were visiting the land of Oz vicariously through the magic of reading. But then you can't have any adventures or any narrative drama if there's no threat of death. So he either will forget about this or he'll get around it by saying, okay, you can't die, but you can still get chopped up into little pieces. And I think, okay, well, why is that better than having them die? Just go back to people letting people die in the land of Oz. And in fact, he goes out of his way in the opening chapters. I forget if it was chapter 1 or 2 of Glinda of Oz. To remind the reader of this. Nobody could die in the land of Oz. Let me see if I can... I've noted that quote down somewhere. It's just silly, in my opinion, how this whole thing has evolved. Yeah. Here we go. From chapter 1. The very fact that Dorothy lived in Oz and had been made a princess by her friend Ozma, prevented her from being killed or suffering any great bodily pain as long as she lived in that fairyland. She could not grow big either, and would always remain the same little girl who came to Oz, unless in some way she left that fairyland or was spirited away from it. But Dorothy was immortal nonetheless, and might possibly be destroyed or hidden where none of her friends could ever find her. Excuse me. She could, for instance, be cut into pieces, and the pieces, while still alive and free from pain, could be widely scattered. Or she might be buried deep underground, or destroyed in other ways by evil magicians, were she not properly protected. So that's, I guess, right in chapter 1 to say, okay, kids, you can't die, but there's still narrative tension. Just ridiculous. He should never have invented the rule that nobody could die in the land of Oz. But then going out of his way to remind readers about this in chapter 1, then throughout the rest of the book, it's seems to be operating under the assumption that the threat of death is real. Now, granted, nobody dies in the book, but there are fishes in the lake who are under threat of being killed. There's some threat to poison the fishes or boil and eat the fishes. And I don't know, maybe fish don't count as living things in the land of Oz, or just silly. Okay, so Dorothy and Ozma escape from the Flatheads and then go to the land of the Skeezers, where they encounter much the same thing. An imperialist ruler, in this case a queen, who refuses to recognize Ozma's authority. Now, the cool thing about the Land of the Skeezers, I had said earlier that this was a book that was lacking in imagination, but I'm going to take that back slightly. There is some cool stuff going on with the Land of the Skeezers. It's this domed city in the middle of a lake, so like an island city that's got this dome around it. And it's got this bridge that kind of extends to the shore, and then you can get on it and it'll take you back to the Land of the Skeezers. And then, once the war breaks out as kind of a defense mechanism, the domed city submerges into the lake. And, you know, it's protected by the dome. So it can be underwater, and you can look out from the dome and see, you know, the fish swimming by as the whole city is underwater. Kind of cool to imagine. And Marie Ness, in her reviews, points out that this is kind of a science fiction, like steampunk type element infiltrating the Oz series, because it's mentioned that the dome city rises and sinks via these mechanical gears, which are kind of cranking around. Now, the gears are controlled by magic, and this becomes a plot point later in the book that, you know, nobody is able to get the city to rise up again because nobody knows the particular magic spell that was used by the queen to submerge it. So we are still clearly in the land of magic and fairy tales, but with a little bit of science or mechanics thrown in, I guess. So Dorothy and Ozma, while this is going on, are trapped in the dome under the water. And then, I forget how, somehow or other, Glinda finds out that Dorothy and Ozma are trapped, and so there's a huge rescue party that go out to get her, and it is quite a huge party. The Tin Woodman, the Scarecrow, the Patchwork Girl, the Shaggy Man, Tick-Tock, Jack Pumpkinhead, Cap'n Bill, the Wogglebug, the Frogman, Uncle Henry, the Glass Cat, Betsy, Trot, Ojo, Button Bright, and the Cowardly Lion are all going out on this expedition. So this is one of the things I kind of like about the Oz series, is that L. Frank Baum is gradually throughout the series accumulating all these weird and wacky characters, and then keeps bringing them back for cameos, so that the group of weird and wacky characters gets bigger every time with every book. Marie Ness, in her review, and I think, to be fair, she meant this in jest, but she said it's all the Oz characters except for Billina the hen. But it's not actually. There are, I don't know, like 3 times as many Oz characters that are not part of this expedition, if you go through all the previous books. But it is definitely a lot of them. Now, the problem with all these characters going along is there's not really anything for them to do. I mean, I think they all get maybe 1 or 2 lines throughout the course of the book. The Glass Cat gets attacked by a jaguar. Button Bright gets lost. The Frogman, I think, has a couple lines. The Frogman also helps Jack Pumpkinhead to walk. But yeah, essentially there's this huge cast of characters which serves no purpose other than, well, I guess you would call it fan service nowadays. I'm sure that term did not exist back in 1920. But you know, just bringing these characters back for the sake of bringing them back. Kind of a little pointless, but I'm going to call it a positive. there's also a little almost story within a story. So yeah, part of the plot is that there are three, they're called magical adepts, which I guess just means girls who can do magic, who are transformed into fishes and are in the pond and need to be transformed back into their human form so they can do magic. There are so many magical creatures in this book, it's really getting superfluous. And there's with all these Oz characters walking around doing nothing, interestingly enough, L. Frank Baum takes a completely new character, one of the skeezers, one of the people from the domed city, who we've never heard of before. I believe his name is Elric. We've not been introduced to him. He's got no personality that we know of. He's just a random skeezer who happens to stumble across the three fishes, and the three fishes instruct him how to get back to their magic form. To get back to their original human form. So he's got to visit, what is it, a name of a Yuhu or Yulric or something like that, some sort of magical creature, and just stay in her house, however much she tries to get him to leave. And there's a chapter or two just describing him going through all the trials that this magical creature is putting on him and just refusing to leave and just refusing to break character. I'm not doing it justice by this brief summary I'm giving, but if you read the whole thing, it's very much, struck me as being very much in tone and character, like one of the Brothers Grimm fairy tales. And I say that as somebody who read through the complete collection of the Brothers Grimm fairy tales and reviewed them on this channel. It's something that could easily be part of that fairy tale collection, the whole tone of it. So it was well done for what it was, and it's worth remembering at this point that L. Frank Baum was taking the fairy tales as his model. So like when he was writing these Oz stories, he was explicitly referring back to folk tales and fairy tales as the type of thing he was trying to emulate. So for a modern audience, I think this all plays as a little bit silly. But for what L. Frank, you got to give him credit for doing what he was trying to do. He was trying to create modern fairy tales, and that whole little episode was very modern fairy tale-esque. Even though the character of Elric just kind of came out of nowhere. It was almost like it was its own little separate story, though it did connect back to the big story. And then, then they eventually do figure out the magic to get the domed city back up. Oh, sorry, Yukahu. Yukahu was Red Rira the Yukahu was the name of the magic creature that Elric had to endure for, what was that, chapter 18 and 19. So went on for a couple of chapters, that little folkloric element. So yeah, Glinda does eventually get the city up again, and then the ending here is very rushed. I even went on Wikipedia to see if there was something about L. Frank Baum kind of dying while the story was still half done or something like that. But I can't find anything, and apparently the story went through a couple drafts, so I guess presumably he had time to finish it before he died. Perhaps it's just as well that the ending is very rushed. I mean, you don't want a long, dragged-out ending where all the loose ends are being tied up. You want something very quick, where it just in a few paragraphs says, okay, and then this was fixed, and then this was fixed, and then they went back to the land of the Flatheads and fixed this, and this person promised never to be bad again, and then the end. maybe that type of ending is just as well for a book like this. And I think that's basically all I wanted to say about this. Other than go check out Dane's review. It's way back from April, but despite the time lag, we are doing this as a buddy reads. He makes a few good points in it. He talks about there being a good message in here about that Ozma saying to Dorothy about how people need to be able to work for something in order to make them happy. And you shouldn't rely on magic to solve all your problems. Dane said that was a very good message for L. Frank Baum to leave his children audience with. And I agree with that. That strikes me as well as kind of a good note to go out on. Marie Ness, however, over in her review, points out that message is undercut by the fact that Ozma is keeping all these Oz characters at her palace with nothing to do. And in fact, it explicitly says in the narrative they have nothing to do. They're just playing croquet all day. And when it's time to go rescue Ozma, they're all able to up and leave because nobody's doing anything. So I guess credit to Marie Ness for pointing out those contradictions. But I think Dane's right in his main point. It's good message overall. Good one to leave the kids with. So this is the end of the Oz series. Dane has decided to go on with the other books in the canonical Oz series, the ones that were done by other authors. Some of those books are available on Project Gutenberg, and I got myself a Kindle for a few reasons, but one of the reasons being the idea of reading those Project Gutenberg books on the Kindle. So I may continue with this series I don't know. At the same time, I am feeling a little sick of this series at the moment, as has probably come across a little bit in these reviews. But I'll update once I get around to it. The very next thing I will do, though, is I'm going to make one retrospective review talking about this book kind of as a whole. And that will probably be the next video to appear on this channel. All right, finish out here.